All right, guys, we're going to talk about the law of segregation. The law of segregation has to do with genes that are on homologous chromosomes. Now, this is a little bit confusing because in this model, the homologous chromosomes are both the same color because at the parental generation, the true breeding parents are homozygous for the genes we're following. So our homologous chromosomes are going to start the same color. Now this cell has gone through DNA replication, so each chromosome is made of two sister chromatids. Meiosis I will separate the homologous chromosomes, and meiosis II will separate the sister chromatids. So from a true breeding homozygous parent, we get 4 gametes that are all the same, that all have the same allele in each gamete. We do the same thing in our other true breeding parent that's homozygous recessive for the trait we're following. The yellow parent, even though it has 2 copies of the big A gene, contributes only 1 copy of the big A gene to each of its offspring. Likewise, the red parent, even though it has 2 copies of the little a gene, only contributes 1 copy of the little a gene to each of its offspring. These offspring are the F1. They are heterozygous, and they are going to be self-pollinated or crossed to each other to produce the next generation, the F2s. In the heterozygotes, the homologous chromosomes do not have the same versions of the genes. So they have 1 chromosome that has little a and 1 chromosome that has big A. They have 2 copies of every gene, but they only contribute 1 allele or the other to each of their offspring. So the parent on top contributes either little a or big A to each of its offspring. Likewise, the parent on the left is also heterozygous. It has a big A allele and a little a allele, but can only give 1 allele or the other to each of its offspring. So these 2 parents, even though they're genetically identical, can produce offspring that have 3 distinct genotypes. These offspring are the F2. The genotypes of the F2s are either homozygous dominant, big A, homozygous recessive, little a, or heterozygous, big A, little a. Mendel was able to draw several conclusions based on the 3-to-1 phenotypic ratio of the F2s. Firstly, he determined that genes come in different forms, which we now call alleles, the big A versus the little a. Parents have 2 copies of every gene. We now know that these 2 copies of the gene are contained on the homologous chromosomes. Next, even though parents have 2 copies of each gene, they can only give 1 allele or the other to each of their children. This is true whether they're homozygous or heterozygous. We now know that those 2 alleles segregate from each other or separate during meiosis I.